some people say...
trying to imagine how to see things without the modes of perception that have occurred since then. The science of psychology, for example, did not exist before 1800.
Yeah.
You know, if you can imagine living before 1800 in which you have to analyze what kind of person is this without using psychology.
I mean, this is just one example of the fact that things have changed. Changes have occurred over the 2 millennium in the Christian text and 1,400 years in the Islamic text. There are those, but ultimately the continuum, the two poles of the continuum, the literal and non-literal, it's various analysis or approach to the text. There will be those who would say we as human beings have no right to input. We simply have to look at the text and implement. I find it very difficult that as a human being or as a scholar of my faith to be told that this is the text, you simply implement it. Implement what?
I'm reminded of a Christian comedian who, trying to point out some of the absurd possibilities, mentioned a woman she met at some point, and she said if you walked into the room and said, "My arm hurts," the woman would, who is always quoting Bible verses, would respond, "If thine arm offend thee, cut it off." And of course everyone laughed because that's a totally absurd application of that text.
Yes. So, I mean, we cannot... This is the challenge for the scholars today, that once you are far away from the founding figure of a particular faith, and within this period of whatever number of years, changes have taken place. How do we deal with the text, with the scripture that is left to us as the foundation of our faith? There will be, once you ask this question, there will be a different answer. And
probably
these
from every minister you ask.
Yes, and every answer locates that particular person who answers the question on a particular point within this continuum. I mean, within Islam, we have our literalists that, to only mention one of them, the Wahhabi movement primarily in Saudi Arabia, but now they are coming out. The Wahhabi mentality is a closed mind, very literalist mentality that sees no room for human input, no discussion, no communication, no challenge. This is the text, you have to apply it.
What would be the advantages of such an approach?
It's much easier.
It's easier?
It's much easier. You don't need
security?
Yes. You have a text, and at the end of the day, going back to the conversation we had about the challenge and the hypocrisy, the good intention. Now there is a justification. This is the text, and I'm following the text. Nobody can criticize and say, look, you are not following the right approach. This is it. The right approach is the text. What is absent from such a conversation is that these texts did not, were not revealed in vacuum.
They had a context.
They had a context.
A sociological context, a historical context.
Yeah, complex contexts. A variety, multitude of contexts that we need to analyze and understand. That are there similarities between the two? But for them, it's much easier not to get into this debate about analyzing context and human intellect and feeding into it, or making comments and creating space for human input.
While on one hand, I can understand that it's a lot of work to come to deeper understandings, my perception is that the richness of your experience of life after coming to that deeper understanding is easily worth the effort it took to get.
I totally agree with you.
But I can understand that because it is a lot of work, there will be people who choose not to do the work.
It's not going to be easy to go back to the text and look at historical reasons for the revelation and try to sift through and make the text. You see, my personal interpretation, I mean no disrespect between the two polarities, the literalist turns the text into a dead, static text.
Okay.
that was relevant, I mean, came 1,400 years ago, and for us, we have no input, we simply have to implement. This is,
Which,
to me,
of
is a
course,
dead text.
Which, of course, they would not describe it as dead so
I
much
agree.
as a reliable foundation stone.
Or following God's order. This is what God wanted, or this is how the text
Which,
has come.
I mean, we don't need to answer it because I'm afraid it would step on people's toes, but it raises the question for me, if God is unchanging, is God alive?
That's a different issue, and the relationship between God and human being.
Yeah.
But the second one definitely requires effort, struggle. It's not going to be easy, but as you said, at the end of this struggle, or what we call jihad, and which literally means struggle, the conclusion that one reaches not gives the satisfaction. It's well worth the effort that you now look at the text in a totally different way rather than in a static way.
No, it's not about just being satisfied about having the answer, but
You
about,
can't say that you have had the answer.
but finding yourself in a more empowered place of living.
Exactly. I mean, now you see how the text works in one's life, and how the relationship between God, the divine, and human agency in trying to make a particular faith or a scripture livable.
And it does very much come down to the idea of relationship. Even with the text, there is a relationship between oneself and the text. And what we need to look at is whether that relationship is empowering or limiting.
Yeah. I mean, these are framework or criteria that we use to judge our own interpretation, or at least our own input.